Welcome to Canonical. I'm James Shao, and I'm joined by Sam Spieler and Iad Darris.
Hey.
Hello.
Today we are starting our series on Afrofuturism with Octavia Butler's The Parable of the Sower. If you want to join our discussion, you can find our book club on Reddit by clicking on the link in our episode description. And you can support us and your local bookstore by using our bookshop.org link, which is also in that episode description. At the store page, you can find books for our book club and other books that we recommend. And we are on social media at Canonical Pod, so you can come on social media or go on Reddit to chat with us. Next week, we'll have an in-depth discussion of The Parable of the Sower. We hope you'll join us for that one as well. So Afrofuturism. Who picked this series?
I picked this series. And since this is the first book in this series, I want to talk about why we've picked it. Afrofuturism is a pretty broad topic. And it was a term coined by a guy named Mark Derry in 1993, which is fairly recent, but the genre goes back a lot further. It can be understood broadly as the way that Black people think about and imagine futures that usually involve ideas about science fiction, post-humanist issues, post-apocalyptic futures, and fantastic devices and metaphors. So it can incorporate science fiction and fantasy, dystopia, and a whole bunch of other subgenres. But the idea is that it primarily centers around Black futures and Black and African understandings of different mythologies and worldviews. But it isn't just in literature either. We can see this at play in the music of musicians like Sun Ra, Grace Jones, Parliament Funkadelic, and more recently, Deltron 3030 and A Tribe Called Quest. And it's also explored by various visual artists and in film and other media. And I wanted to dive into this idea because while I was familiar with the concept, I didn't really know very much about it. And this felt like a perfect time to explore a topic that I have a feeling isn't particularly well known or understood outside of Black art or political circles.
So we're starting off this series with The Parable of the Sower by Butler. And the reason why I picked this book is I've actually had Butler on my list for a really long time. Back in college, I thought, I'll probably get to her sometime. She's someone that I've heard of before, and I just never got around to reading her. So she's been on my, I guess it's a book bucket list. I don't know what a book bucket list would be called, but it's the equivalent of that. I've been wanting to read her for a long time.
A bucket list?
Oh, God.
Yeah, I didn't go with that one because it's stupid.
Yeah. Leave it to me.
I read Dawn, which is one of her Xenogenesis novels when I was in grad school. It's very different from this, but maybe a little bit more serious. I feel like this was a little bit more fun than Dawn.
Did you find it enjoyable?
This novel, I think, is more enjoyable. I think Dawn was much more heavy and serious. Maybe I'm just in a better place to appreciate this novel and what Butler has to offer, but at the time I didn't really enjoy it.
So there's a reason why Butler is studied in grad school, and she's a notable voice in the science fiction community. When she first started writing, the genre was dominated by white males. You can look at our transhumanism series as evidence of that. And it still is largely dominated by white males. So Butler was one of the first Black female writers who came to prominence in the 70s. And over the course of her career, she's won pretty much every sci-fi award there is. So she's gotten a lot of recognition. And she also won a MacArthur Genius Award, which they don't give out to just anybody, but they do give it out to a fair amount of writers. So it's good that she's gotten that kind of recognition. That shows it's not just in the sci-fi community where she's getting recognition. And now, even though she's died, her work kind of is still being studied by people, and she's still relevant today. So that's one of the main reasons why I picked the book and why I was really looking forward to reading her. And also, just kind of a funny note, Another print of it was published in 2020, and it became a bestseller just last year. That's rare. It was not really a bestseller when it came out, I think. It was a notable book at the time, but it didn't sell as well, I believe.
Her work is more, I would say, explicitly political than a lot of other science fiction. I feel like it's motivated by a lot of contemporary politics that make her feel especially relevant to people on the contemporary left.
Yeah, and she is someone who has gone on record saying that she writes herself into her work. There's a reason why this character is kind of her, largely because Black women are underrepresented in science fiction, but also in literature in general. Because of that, she thinks it's very important to have a Black female protagonist who I'm assuming shares her views.
One of the other reasons she wanted to start writing was when she was a kid, I believe. She saw this bad sci-fi movie called Devil Girl from Mars, and she thought, I can do it better than that.
Yeah, this was part of a speech she gave at MIT called Why I Write Science Fiction. Also worth checking out. We could link to it in our show notes for a listener.
So let's talk about this book specifically. Parable of the Sower is the first of an unfinished trilogy. She never finished her third book because she encountered writer's block and passed away before she could finish it. So the protagonist of this story is Lauren Olamina. She lives in a walled community at the beginning of the book in one of the suburbs of Los Angeles. Set in the mid-2020s, society has fallen by that time due to climate change and other unnamed causes. So this was published in 93. She's imagining a world about 30 years in the future from when she was writing. Lauren begins to formulate a religion centered on change as God. In the second half of the novel, she begins a journey to the north and meets other travelers who are also seeking a better life. I'm not going to get into it anymore because there are a lot of spoilers in this book. It's very plot-driven. When I was reading it, actually reminded me a lot of Station 11, which we talked about in our pandemic literature series. That book also features a female teenage protagonist who leads a group of travelers toward a safe haven. But in that book, we critiqued Station 11 for its kind of vague ideas, its very loosey-goosey theme of art being valuable. In this book, I'd say that it embodies a much more radical ideology, which is along the lines of libertarian socialism or mutualism. It's a novel that argues against inaction for the sake of comfort and instead advocates for proactive and decisive change. I actually did enjoy this book quite a bit more than Station 11. Even though I did like reading Station 11, I felt that this book offered more for me as a reader. The weakest part of the book, though, is the voice. I couldn't really get into the voice. I thought it distracted me, especially at the beginning of the book. I found it distracting. There were moments when I really didn't believe that this was a 15-year-old, and I didn't really get into the whole confessional diary aspect of the book. But once I kind of set that aside and just sort of thought, well, this is what it is, I became very much engrossed in the plot. I read the book in one sitting after listening to the first 5 chapters on audiobook. And I mean, one of the reasons why is because this book hits a lot of topics that I really like reading about. For example, dystopian sci-fi, but not depressing dystopian sci-fi. It's set in California, and I love reading stories and novels set in California. It's about libertarian socialism and communes, which I'm really into. I love reading about that. And it's even got a May-December relationship, which is, bonus points. That's great.
I agree with you. If you've read this novel and you've read Station 11, the parallels are very clear. It is a much stronger novel than Station 11 because the stakes are higher and we really understand what's at stake for Lauren as she goes through this world that's full of danger. There is a definite sense of claustrophobia and tension in the novel. but there are some bad points that prevent me from really loving the novel. Like you, I thought that the diary format was pretty weak. It didn't really encourage the development of really interesting scenes. It would just cut from one thing to the next. And one thing that I think a lot of people will say is central to the novel that I really didn't like was the Earthseed verses. So throughout the novel, the main character has ideas about religion and ideas about life, and she writes these kind of pseudo biblical verses. And I found that just really cringy.
When she drops the verses in there, I didn't love those, but one thing I really did enjoy, and it's why I forgave the diary format, was that I love that we're kind of seeing this prophet being formed. We're seeing this young girl who is figuring out what she believes. And through that figuring out, it's like watching the birth of this prophet. So while I didn't like the verses themselves, mostly actually because they were really repetitive, I forgave it because I liked it in conjunction with seeing what it might look like to follow a new prophet.
I'll say that I think it's authentic coming from the voice of a teenager thinking about life and religion. It makes sense. But what bothers me is that she shares these ideas with other people, and other people, adults, take her seriously. And that to me just seemed unbelievable. I don't think people would ridicule her, but I think like they're more enthusiastic than they should be.
I guess so. They're also desperate. They're all seeking something.
I agree with you, Sam, in that reading about the formation of a religion, especially in this kind of dystopian setting, is pretty interesting, very compelling. It's kind of like Dune. That's what Dune's about. And I think that's one of the main attractions of Dune. But I'm with Ed in that I did not like the verses. It's not just that it's preachy because it is, it's just bad writing.
Well, I will say the prose in general isn't amazing. It's good and it's compelling. It definitely made me want to keep reading, but it's not special, I guess. It's not standout. So the verses kind of go along with that, even though I think you're right. They are the weakest points writing wise. And I think you're also right that you do have to suspend a lot of disbelief. I agree, especially at the beginning, that this didn't necessarily feel like a 15-year-old, but I think she's kind of a weirdo and she knows it. But I also feel like the importance of a novel like this is pretty easy to overlook. I don't think the prose or the verses are the most important thing here. We've talked before about how ideas can come cheap, but I don't think these are cheap ideas. James already mentioned that she was an early force in the Black science fiction world. Previously, I believe the only other Black writer doing that was Samuel Delany, who we also considered for this series. But this book, while it has a fairly straightforward plot and style, I think it's got much deeper significance and interesting points with racial and socioeconomic politics.
Again, I have to say, well, I agree with you. It has more to offer than, Station 11 did. I do think that it is very comparable to Station 11 in that both novels really wear their politics on their sleeves. It's really clear to me what Butler's politics are. And as you had mentioned, James, that's probably her point. Like she wants to get her voice into the novel, but it was too upfront. It was very clear to me that this is the product of a novelist with a certain political worldview, and it was just conspicuously done. Now, that conspicuousness can be said to be a product of where I'm coming from as a reader, because other people would say that there is no such thing as an apolitical text. And this novel will just stand out because it has a non-mainstream point of view. That said, it still stuck out to me, and it still felt like, yes, these are views that are predictable just because you know who the writer is and you know what kind of person she is. It was never surprising.
It's not really a subtle book. I think you're right about all of that. But that really didn't bother me.
I think on the idea level, that is a very valid criticism. But for me, one of the main reasons to enjoy this novel is the plot. And it literally was one of the few books I could not put down. I really did enjoy the story aspect of the book. So we're talking about enjoyment on different levels here. I think on the idea level, yes, I'm totally with you. It's on the nose. It's not as bad as New York 2140, where Kim Stanley Robinson is kind of lecturing you in a way with his
Right.
very cliched characters or his caricatures. Because I think these characters are actually better formed and better depicted, but it's in the same vein.
Yeah, you can speak to this a bit more since you've read Dawn, but I get the feeling that most of her books are probably similar in that way, that they are very upfront about what they're trying to say, what their politics are, what her politics are.
Yes, I think that it's the reason why she has such a readership among the contemporary left, because it's clear who she is and what she's about. And I think that her ideas really resonate with a lot of readers. You don't have to really investigate very deeply to figure out where Octavia Butler's points of views are coming from. And if you agree with her, you'll feel really satisfied, because I do think that her point of view is often difficult to find in mainstream media. As usual, I seem to be shitting on everything that people love. And, I'm willing to take that up because that is kind of my role here in the podcast. But I do want to say that I actually did enjoy this novel. Like James, I found it really interesting and engaging. And in terms of plot and story, it was really interesting. The only reason why I can say these negative things about it is just because I'm a demanding reader, and I totally admit that. And, I think that for other readers who don't care so much about these ideas, things, it wouldn't be such a problem.
All right, let's pause for a break here. When we come back, we'll talk about who we think would enjoy reading this book. We'll be right back. Welcome back. So this is one of those books that I think is kind of geared toward a young adult audience. Do you guys feel the same way? Do you think that this is something that would belong in a YA section of a bookstore or library?
It could. There are some pretty dark things, but yeah, I think so.
Young readers are getting more sophisticated, and the line between what young people read and what adults read is getting blurred by the second.
So would you then say that this book should be part of a high school curriculum?
I'm pretty sure this was on a lot of lists when I was in high school for things that we could read. It was already included. It's not something that was taught, at least not in any of my classes, but I do recall seeing her name around that time.
As someone who believes that young people are not really exposed to enough variations of political systems and beliefs, I really think this book should be taught to young people. But of course, as Ian mentioned earlier, this kind of closely mirrors a lot of our beliefs politically. So we are obviously biased. But I think it's good to teach young people a text that advocates for radical change. Even if they don't become activists, I think it's important to get them to think about it.
I mean, if our mission here is to create an inclusive canon, as we say, I think teaching books like this book is exactly what we would want, because this is a novel that's very different from the status quo, and purposefully so. So if we're saying young people should be thinking about these things from a young age, that really includes a lot of new ideas in the canon. And I think, as a matter of practical concern, I think it would be difficult to get a lot of people who aren't kind of Bay Area weirdos like us to be on board with reading Butler in high school. I do think that it would be good to expose young people to a wider variety of political and social ideas.
The interesting thing about this book is, even though it's very much something that would appeal to us and we are all dirty lefties, it is not a book that fits very neatly in the contemporary political ideology spectrum, because there are people on the right who are also anti-government, for example. Like, it's a libertarian socialist book. That's how I would describe it. And, there are libertarians who are very right. This book is very anti-government in a lot of ways. And it kind of preaches self-sufficiency, survivalism even. So I could see it as something that almost bridges the divide. Like, people of all stripes can read this book and take something from it, even if it's something as basic as an enjoyment of the plot. I mean, I would hope that they take something more than that, but I think people would not be turned off reading this book, even if they are, let's say, really far right-wing.
Yeah, I think there probably are things that would rub certain people the wrong way, but I think it's also pretty easy to miss those things if you're not a very discerning reader. And as you say, James, the plot is really good. It's a very quick read.
I mean, the only people I see who might be offended by this are racists. Like, I mean, it's a pro-gun book, right?
Right.
Like, I'd say it is. It's pro, like, getting your bug out bag ready, or whatever they call that, like people who are doomers and preppers. Like, it is not a very squarely in the left ideology. I think it's something that has appeal to a lot of different people. And it's not something where, you read this book and you think, oh, this is the DNC preaching at me. So with that said, who would you recommend this book to?
Everyone.
Yeah, I think I would. I think, I mean, this is not something I think that only women would enjoy, though I did kind of dislike that young teenage girl voice. I thought, pretty much anyone could enjoy this book.
The attractive points, the points with mass appeal, are easy to notice, and the contentious points, the points that will turn some readers off, are easy to miss. And because they're easy to miss, I think most readers could find something enjoyable in this novel. But if they stick with it, I think they could also find something to turn them off.
This is similar, though not as dark as The Road. But people who enjoyed The Road would probably enjoy this too. It has a similar feel. And now I don't remember the exact plot of this movie, but it kind of reminded me a little bit of Book of Eli, which is set in this post-apocalyptic world and is religious in nature. I don't know if you guys ever saw that.
With Will Smith?
Close. What's his
Another
name?
black actor?
Denzel.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
You say they all look the same to you, don't they? I'll spare you from the...
Spare me. You're the one who got it wrong.
All right.
I thought it was Donald Glover. All right, let's stop here then. Thank you for listening. If you disagreed with our review of this book, let us know. I know there's at least one person who disagrees because someone did talk to me on Reddit about the fact that he did not, I'm going to say he, I don't know if it's he or she, but the fact that he did not enjoy Parable of the Sower and that picking it was a bad choice. But I stick by it. I actually did like it quite a bit. So you're wrong, random Redditor. So yeah, you can come on Reddit and chat with us. Find that link in our episode description. We are on social media at Canonical Pod. Next week, we'll be back with an in-depth discussion of this book, Parable of the Sower. If you're interested in that, go ahead and find a copy of the book. If you're someone who really cares about plot, you probably would like to read this book before we discuss it because we will be giving away a lot of spoilers. Till next week, happy reading. We'll talk to you soon.